By the time I understood that loneliness could dress itself up as power, I was already in love with the most feared man on the eastern coast of Sicily. People like Enzo Carbone were not supposed to arrive in places like my pension. Men like him belonged in whispered headlines, in black cars gliding past church steps, in rooms where everyone lied politely and someone always bled afterward. Not in my hallway with rain on his shoulders and murder tucked beneath a clean pillow, but storms have terrible timing. That night, the sea threw itself against the cliffs below my house. The lights cut twice, and 3 armed men brought a wounded stranger into the best room I had left. By morning, I had found the gun under his pillow. By noon, he had caught me holding it. By evening, my name was inside his mouth like something he did not mean to keep. I thought the danger was the weapon. It was. It was the way he looked at me after I told him not to leave violent things where ordinary women had to change the sheets, and then he smiled. The storm arrived before the men did. In Sicily, rain was rarely gentle when it came from the sea. It struck windows like thrown gravel and made the cliffs below Villa Romano sound less like rock and more like something breathing in the dark. My pension had belonged to my mother before it belonged to me, and before that it had been a merchant's summer house with too many doors and too many opinions. In weather like that, the old place creaked as if it wanted to complain personally. I had just finished starching the sheets for room 7 when headlights swept across the courtyard wall. 3 cars. Too expensive for tourists, too late for decent people. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to the front hall before Biagio, my uncle, could get there first. He limped in the winter and worried in all seasons, which meant I handled arrivals whenever I could. The front door opened on a gust of salt and rain. 2 men came in first, broad-shouldered and silent in the particular way armed men were silent. Between them was a 3rd man wearing a charcoal coat darkened at one side with water, and lower, with blood. He was taller than either of them, not bulky, just built like someone who had learned stillness before language. His hair was rain black, his jaw shadowed, his expression stripped clean of anything easy to read. One cuff was torn. His gaze moved over the hall, the staircase, the keys hanging on their hooks, then landed on me. Not a glance, a hold. My uncle appeared behind me. "We're full." One of the men reached inside his coat. The wounded stranger lifted 2 fingers without looking at him. The hand withdrew at once. "We need 1 room," the stranger said. His voice was low, educated, and cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. "For the night," Biagio swallowed. "We don't ask questions here." The stranger's gaze remained on me. Good. I should have looked away. Sensible women did. Sensible women also did not stand in hallways at midnight measuring the danger in a stranger's face while rain ran off him onto old tile. Instead I said, "If he's bleeding on the floor, he pays extra." My uncle closed his eyes briefly, like a man remembering every wrong turn that had led to my personality. One of the silent men nearly laughed and thought better of it. The stranger did not. He only looked at me a second longer, as if filing something away. "Do you always greet guests like this?" "Only the ones who arrive leaking." That finally moved the corner of his mouth. It was not warmth, just recognition. Of nerve, perhaps, or inconvenience. Room 7 was at the end of the upstairs corridor, farthest from the road and closest to the sea-facing windows. I took a lamp, because the current kept threatening to die, and led them up myself. The wounded man walked without help, which bothered me more than if he had leaned. Men who refused to show weakness usually hid worse things than pain. Inside the room, the lavender-starched sheets were turned down, the curtains half-drawn, the lamp by the bed already lit. The scent of clean linen rose warm in the old air. The stranger noticed it. I knew he did because his eyes flicked just once to the bed. "You'll need fresh bandages," I said. "We have them. Then try not to ruin the pillowcases." My uncle made a choking sound somewhere behind me. The stranger looked at the white bed, then at my flour-dry hands, then at my face. "And if I do, then I charge you for those 2. His men waited for anger that never came. He only shrugged out of his coat with a small tightening around the mouth that told me the wound hurt more than he intended to admit. Blood had soaked through his shirt at the ribs. I turned to leave. He said, "What's your name?" "Clara." His gaze dropped to my hands again. The starch, the soap, the faint scent of lavender from the linen cupboard. "Lavanda," he said. I frowned. "That isn't my name." "It is tonight." Cold, observational, slightly possessive, I disliked it on sight, which should have been warning enough. By dawn, the storm had settled into steady rain. My uncle went to market. The cook called in sick. 2 guests complained about the draft under their doors, another about the church bells, and the widow from Catania wanted lemon tea before 7 because grief apparently woke early. Normal life. Almost. Room 7 checked out of ordinary the moment I carried fresh towels upstairs. No answer at the door. I knocked again. Still nothing. I let myself in because that was what maids did in houses like mine. Worked around silence, around absence, around the private debris strangers left behind. The bed had been slept in on one side only. The window was cracked open to the rain. On the nightstand stood a glass of water, untouched, and beside it a black rosary so old the wood had gone almost smooth. I gathered the damp towels, straightened the blanket, then lifted the pillow to change the case. A gun slid into my hand. Heavy, black, loaded. I stared at it for exactly 1 heartbeat. Then the bathroom door opened behind me. I turned. The stranger stood there in shirt sleeves, hair damp, blood newly bandaged beneath clean linen. He had gone absolutely still, not surprised. Worse. Precise, his eyes went first to the gun, then to my face. The room changed around us, not in sound, in pressure. I should have screamed, dropped it, apologized. I knew that even before I knew his name. Instead, I thumbed the chamber open the way my father had taught me years ago in a house that no longer believed in keeping useful lessons from girls. I slid out the bullets into my palm, set both gun and rounds carefully on the nightstand, and pulled the clean pillowcase over the cushion. Then I looked at him and said, "If you want to hide dangerous things, don't put them where a maid has to work." For the first time, his entire expression altered. Not much. Enough. I did not know then that no one in his world spoke to him like that. That men lied to him, feared him, obeyed him, bled for him, but never treated his violence like a household inconvenience. He crossed the room slowly, stopped 2 feet from me, and picked up the emptied gun. "Most people," he said softly, "would have panicked. Most people don't have 6 rooms to turn over before lunch." His gaze held mine 1 second too long. The rain struck the window harder. And when he said, "Leave the door open, Lavanda," it sounded less like instruction and more like the first lock turning somewhere I couldn't see. I left it open. I wish that had meant I was still free. By breakfast, I knew 2 things. First, the men in room 7 were not tourists. Second, whatever trouble they had brought to my pension had better table manners than most of my paying guests. The wounded stranger came downstairs at 9, wearing a dark sweater, a pressed coat, and the expression of a man who had either never slept or had decided he no longer required it. He took the corner table by the rain-streaked window facing the cliff road and sat with one hand near his coffee, the other flat on the wood, as if even breakfast had to be negotiated with control. The 2 men from the night before placed themselves at separate tables without pretending to be casual. Armed men always believed they were subtle. Armed men were wrong. I set down his espresso and a plate of almond biscuits. "You're still here," I said. He looked at the cup. "Observant. It's a business requirement." He lifted the espresso. "And if I decide to stay another night, I charge more for complications." That almost smile threatened again. "Do you know what kind?" "No." I straightened a sugar bowl that did not need straightening. But men who sleep with guns under pillows don't usually check out quietly. There it was. His fingers paused against the porcelain. Only the listener of my life would have understood then what I did not. I had just named the truth of him before knowing the story behind it. Men who kept weapons under their sleep were not afraid of the dark. They were afraid of waking too late. His voice came cooler when he said, You talk too much. I'm running an inn. It helps. My uncle hissed my name from behind the counter. I ignored him because I had practice. The front bell rang, and in swept Tommaso Greco carrying a bucket of white daisies, a box of cannoli, and enough dramatic despair for a funeral procession. Tommaso delivered flowers to half the village, because his cousin owned the only decent florist on this side of Taormina. He also happened, according to local gossip, to be in catastrophic love with Marta Bellini, the florist herself, a woman who accepted his deliveries, corrected his ribbon choices, and had not yet agreed to dinner despite his public suffering. He kissed the air beside my cheek. Clara, I have been humiliated before noon. It's barely 10. Exactly, an early start. He set down the flowers and lowered his voice tragically. Marta says Gerberas are cheerful, and I am trying too hard. How can flowers accuse a man of emotional excess? You bring 6 dozen for a window arrangement meant to hold 12. Abundance is sincerity. Abundance is inventory loss. He placed a hand over his heart. This is why romance dies in commercial spaces. The stranger in the corner watched us over the rim of his espresso. Tommaso noticed him and straightened. For one fleeting second, I saw recognition pass over his face. Not surprise, worse. Awareness hidden fast. That landed cold in my stomach. I said casually, "A friend of yours." Tommaso looked at the stranger, then back at me, then said to the room at large. I suddenly remember an urgent problem involving hydrangeas, and tried to retreat. The stranger spoke without raising his voice. "Tommaso." Tommaso froze as if pinned there. My uncle dropped a spoon. I looked from one to the other. "You know each other." Tommaso gave me a smile that belonged in churches beside bad news. "Clara," the stranger set down his cup. "Enzo Carbone." I had heard the name before. Everyone in eastern Sicily had. Carefully, in lowered voices. Enzo Carbone owned warehouses, routes, loyalties, judges, rumors. He had inherited one old family alliance and buried 3 others. Men at the port stepped aside when his cars arrived. Priests mentioned him indirectly when speaking about sin and order in the same sermon, and I had unloaded his gun. I stared at him. He stared back. Calm, unmoved, as if my shock was merely one more predictable piece on a board he had already measured. Tommaso murmured, "You see why I wanted hydrangeas." My uncle crossed himself under the counter. I should have apologized then for every insolent thing I had said. Instead, what came out was, "You could have mentioned that." Enzo's gaze did not shift. "Would it have changed your housekeeping?" I hated that I had no answer. Tommaso, sensing doom and unable to survive in its presence without decorating it, said, "For the record, Signor Carbone, I think the gun under the pillow was memorable, but not intimate. Marta once found pruning shears in my bed and still refused me dinner." Even Enzo looked at him. Tommaso lifted both hands. "I panic sleep with tools during busy wedding weeks." "We all have burdens." "Out," Enzo said. Tommaso drew himself upright. "Crushingly fair." To me, he whispered, "If I disappear, avenge me tastefully." Then he grabbed the daisies and fled. The room settled into that strange quiet that follows absurdity when no one quite knows whether to laugh. I took the empty chair opposite Enzo before I could think better of it. "Why are you here?" "To get out of the storm." "That's a lie." "Yes." My fingers tightened around my apron. "Then try a better one." A second of stillness passed. Then he said, "Your father once worked for a man I no longer trust." My breath caught. My father had been dead 7 years, missing officially, dead practically. He had left one autumn morning with a ledger bag and never come home. My mother had called it abandonment until the day illness thinned her down to honesty, and she admitted she no longer knew what to call it. "You knew him?" I asked. Enzo's eyes rested on my face too long. "Not well enough." The answer was not answer enough. I knew it. He knew I knew it. Before I could push further, one of his men entered from the courtyard, rain on his shoulders and urgency hidden badly in the line of his jaw. He bent to murmur near Enzo's ear. Enzo did not look at him. "Say it. The road is watched." The kitchen noises behind me seemed suddenly very far away. By who? I asked. Neither man answered. Enzo rose. Until this is settled, no one leaves the property alone. I laughed once because fear often dressed itself in the wrong clothing. That sounds less like a suggestion. It isn't one. There it was. His quiet, unmistakable control. Not loud, not dramatic, final. I stood too. This is my house. His gaze dropped briefly to my hands, still smelling faintly of lavender starch and dish soap. Then stay inside it, Lavanda. He walked past me before I found a reply, and somehow that was worse than being threatened. When a man like Enzo Carbone told you not to leave your own property, ordinary tasks took on the shape of defiance. So I polished silverware. I checked bookings for the following week, translated 2 German emails, argued with the fish supplier over an invoice error, and climbed twice to the attic storeroom for blankets I did not immediately need. If danger wanted me quiet and decorative, it had chosen the wrong innkeeper. Still, by mid-afternoon, I had counted 4 men I did not know along the wall outside my pension, and 3 more cars that went past too slowly. Enzo had taken over the old study off the back hall without asking. Maps now covered my mother's writing desk. The cracked leather chair held one of his men, a laptop, and a pistol the way another house might have held knitting. Once carrying towels down the corridor, I passed the half-open door and caught a glimpse of the world attached to him. Ports, manifests, coded shipments. Names I recognized from the mayor's charity dinners and the Palermo papers. His empire did not glitter. It organized. That somehow felt worse. At 5, he found me in the laundry room with invoices spread across the folding table. You added the port tax wrong, I said without looking up. Silence. Then, excuse me, I pointed with my pencil. This supplier, they rounded the transport surcharge twice. He came closer. I could feel it in the room before I looked. His cologne carried something colder underneath. Rain, steel, maybe the ghost of gun oil. How do you know? I run a business in 3 languages with guests who think mountain views entitle them to free wine. I know arithmetic. He picked up the invoice, studied it, and after a moment said, You're right. I'm aware. That earned me a look that would have made weaker women apologize for existing. I only turned another page. Your men are paying for 6 rooms and using 2, I said. If this becomes a siege, I'll need updated accounting. He leaned one hand on the table near the papers. Not touching me, worse. Most people try to be agreeable around me. Most people don't have utility bills. He watched me for a second too long. That happened increasingly. I noticed the weight of it before I understood the cost. Finally, he said, Your father did the books too. That made me look up. He was a carpenter, I said. He was both. I stared. You really did know him. His jaw shifted once. He handled maintenance at Villa Barassi, then numbers, then things he should have walked away from. Barassi. The name scraped somewhere old. My mother used to close doors before saying it. Vittorio Barassi, Enzo held my gaze. Yes, that was the first edge of the fast mystery lifting. Before I could ask more, a car engine screamed outside the gate. Then glass shattered downstairs. Instinct moved me faster than thought. I ducked as Enzo caught my wrist and pulled me hard against the stone wall beside the laundry shelves. Men shouted below. A woman in room 4 screamed. Something heavy hit the front hall floor. His hand stayed around my wrist, 1 beat longer than necessary. Neither of us moved. The first physical awareness of him arrived not as romance, but as impact. His chest near mine, his breath controlled, my pulse suddenly loud enough to embarrass me. He smelled like expensive soap over danger. I hated noticing that. He released me at once and drew the gun from the back of his waistband. Stay here. What happened? He was already listening to the noise below, the shift of feet, the particular silence men used just before violence. A message. He went downstairs fast and soundless. I followed to the landing because I had no sense worth respecting. The chandelier in the front hall swayed over splintered glass. A stone lay on the tile wrapped in oilcloth. One of Enzo's men had a bleeding cut across his temple. Another was at the door watching the road. My uncle clutched the banister and looked 70 instead of 62. Enzo crouched, unwrapped the cloth, and exposed a dead gull with its throat cut and a note tied to one leg. Specific cruelty. Specific enough to belong to someone who knew how to make symbolism vulgar. He read the note once and burned it over the hall candle without comment. I said, "That is not normal guest behavior." His eyes lifted to mine. "No, what did it say?" "That I'm late." The answer landed strangely, personal, not strategic. I saw it then, the first quick fracture in his control. Not big enough. My uncle whispered, "Clara, upstairs." I ignored him. "Late for what?" Enzo did not answer directly. He rarely did. "Your father left something behind, and other people think I came here to collect it." There, partial answer. Fast mystery beginning to close. "What thing? I don't know yet." "Then why my house?" His gaze drifted once toward the ceiling. Toward the hidden ribs of the old pension, built by merchants, and inherited by women, and patched by my father's hands. Because if Matteo Romano hid anything, he hid it in wood. That line stayed with me long after he turned away. Later, after the guests had been calmed and the broken glass swept, I went to the closed wing where my mother's old sewing room still smelled faintly of cedar and disuse. I stood there with one hand on the paneling my father had repaired the summer before he vanished. He hid it in wood. My skill was numbers. My father's had been the structures that held them. I ran my fingers over the trim, the joints, the places where boards joined too neatly to be accidental. Then downstairs, a gunshot cracked through the dark, not at the house, from the orchard. The external threat had stopped circling and stepped onto the land. The gunshot in the orchard turned out not to be an attack. That somehow made it worse. One of Enzo's men had caught a prowler near the old fig trees. Just a local boy, 19, frightened, paid €50 to see whether the black cars were still at Villa Romano. He knew nothing useful except the name of the man who had paid him at the dockside bar, and that name bought us exactly what it was meant to buy. Confirmation that whatever had come for Enzo was already using the village. By midnight, my guests had either fled or locked themselves in with rosaries. My uncle drank grappa in the kitchen, pretending it was tea. Enzo stood in the back corridor studying the carved wall beside the disused sewing room while rain tapped the window panes in a tired rhythm. He had changed his shirt. The bandage beneath it still pulled when he moved. Tommaso arrived at 11 with food, spare ammunition, and a basket of orange blossoms he claimed were accidentally surplus, which would have been more convincing if the florist's tag reading for Marta had not still been attached. "You brought flowers to an armed lockdown," I said. Tommaso removed the tag with wounded dignity. "I brought atmosphere, also focaccia." "You're welcome." He noticed the tension in the corridor and lowered his voice. "Should I assume we're one step before disaster or one step after?" "With Enzo," I said. "Apparently those are neighboring rooms." Tommaso sighed. "Marta says I dramatize. Yet here we are, standing in a hallway while guns and flowers coexist." Even one of Enzo's men smiled at that. Tommaso caught sight of the sewing room wall. "Ah, looking for hidden family sins." My least favorite interior style. Enzo ignored him and ran his palm over the carved molding near the floor. Then he stilled. I had seen that look once before. When a guest found a crack in a foundation everyone else had walked over for years. Recognition born from patience. "There," I said, kneeling beside him before I thought better of it. A seam, hair-thin, cut into the walnut panel just beside the baseboard. Enzo glanced at me. "You saw it. My father hated asymmetry." Tommaso hovered over us, clutching orange blossoms and dread. "If this opens onto skeletons, I want credit for arriving before the smell." Enzo took a knife from his pocket and eased the blade into the seam. The panel clicked and came free, revealing a narrow hollow between studs. Inside lay a wrapped ledger, a tarnished saint medal, and a photograph. Fast mystery resolved. He had come for this. I stared at the bundle as if it might explain 7 years of absence and silence in one charitable gesture. It did not. Enzo unfolded the photograph first. I saw my father, younger, beside a stone fountain I recognized from Villa Barassi. Next to him stood a teenage girl with dark braids and laughing eyes. On the back, in my father's handwriting, were 4 words, "For Rosalia, in case." Enzo went completely still, not outwardly. Internally, I knew it by the way the air around him sharpened. "Who is Rosalia?" I asked. His thumb hovered over the name without touching it. "My sister." That was how his past revealed itself, not speech but reaction, a name on paper. A stillness too complete to be ordinary. Tommaso for once said nothing. I touched the saint medal. "My father knew her." "Yes." "What happened?" A long beat passed, rain on glass. Distant engine idling outside, the silence of armed men pretending to be still. Then Enzo said, "A car bomb meant for me took her instead." There it was, specific, brutal. Enough to reorganize everything. I thought I understood about the gun under his pillow, about his sleeplessness, about the way he moved through rooms like doors could betray him. He reached for the ledger. I reached too. Our hands hit the oilcloth at the same moment. Neither of us chose cleanly not to move. My fingers brushed his knuckles, warm, rough, real. His hand stilled under mine for one suspended second while the corridor narrowed around breath, linen, thunder fading out at sea. Then a shout came from downstairs. The first touch broke. Enzo rose instantly, tucking the ledger beneath his arm and drawing his gun with the other hand. "Inside the kitchen, now." "I'm not a vase." "No," he said, already moving. "You're the house." It was such a strange answer that I forgot to argue until he was halfway down the stairs. The kitchen trouble turned out to be a drunk fisherman at the gate insisting the road had been blocked by a fallen olive truck. Men positioned badly. Too perfect. Not an attack yet. Preparation. By the time Enzo returned, the ledger had been moved to the study and 2 more guards had arrived. Fast mystery shut, slow mystery opened wider immediately. Someone had known this was here. Not just Barassi. Someone close enough to Enzo to know his route, close enough to my father's history to understand the house mattered. I found Enzo alone in the study 20 minutes later, the ledger open beneath the green desk lamp. Columns, initials, shipment dates, dock numbers, payments moved through charity accounts. My father's handwriting in the margins, furious and precise. "Does it tell you who killed him?" I asked. Enzo's gaze stayed on the page. "Not yet. Does it tell you who betrayed you?" That made him look up. There was no softness in his face, but there was honesty. "Yes," I waited. He closed the book. "Not enough to use." That answer should have angered me. Instead, it frightened me, because it meant the name existed already between us like a blade he was not ready to lift. When I turned to leave, he said quietly, "Lavanda." I stopped. "Lock your door tonight." "Will that help?" His eyes held mine over the open ledger, over my father's handwriting, over a dead sister's name. "No." The tenderness inside that violence was what unsettled me most. My father taught me sums before he taught me grief. He used to sit me on overturned paint tins in the workshop and make columns out of screws, bolts, and washers while he sanded cabinet doors. "A crooked number," he said once, "is just a lie wearing a tie." I had been 11 and more interested in the sawdust on his boots than wisdom. But some lessons stay, because hands repeat them long after mouths are gone. By morning, Enzo's ledger had become a language problem. His men could read the names, the routes, the ports. They could not read the logic hidden under my father's revisions. The places he scratched out one number only to leave another too neat, the recurring shifts in currency. The patterns in which listed weights never matched listed taxes. Smugglers often lied badly. My father apparently had counted on that. I found Enzo in the study again, jacket off, sleeves rolled, a vein tight in his forearm where he braced over the desk. "I need tea," I said. He did not look up. "You need caution." "I also need tea." I set down both cups and pointed to the page. "These totals are false on purpose." That got his attention. How? I pulled the chair beside him and sat without invitation. No man falsifying for profit makes the same rounding mistake in 3 currencies. These numbers aren't meant to hide money. They're meant to point at movement. His gaze moved from the page to my face. You can see that this quickly. I've been hiding insolvency from German hikers and Sicilian tax inspectors for 4 years. Don't look impressed. It's rude. The truth was uglier. My business was failing. My mother's medical debt had eaten the last good years of the pension, and I had spent the previous 18 months moving invoices between months, translating penalties into deferred fees, and borrowing from one future booking to pay for another leaking roof. I had not told my uncle how close we were to losing the place because he had already lost enough. World forces it, she does not confess. Enzo flipped 3 pages at my direction. I traced a chain of false weights through Palermo, Messina, and Catania until it narrowed around 2 repeating initials. SD. The letters appeared beside cleared inspections, altered container seals, and the routes closest to Baresi-controlled land. Dramatic irony point 2 sat right there. The listener would understand before I did, because by then Sergio Delizio had already been in my hall twice, silver-haired, fatherly, bringing apologies and security advice. The oldest of Enzo's trusted men. I tapped the initials. What does this stand for? Enzo went silent in a way that answered too much. I looked up. You know, he did not say the name. I know the possibility. And possibility is not proof. I hated how careful he sounded. Careful men were dangerous when cornered because they had already thought of the worst. Before I could press, the door opened and Sergio Delizio himself stepped in carrying a tray of sandwiches from the kitchen. He was elegant in the understated way older Sicilian men mastered, cashmere dark as wet stone, silver at the temples, grief lines worn into a face others probably trusted at first meeting. He smiled at me kindly. You've been drafted into war, signorina. I prefer invoices, I said. A sensible woman. He set the tray down and looked at Enzo. Marta sent food. Tommaso added drama. Enzo's expression gave nothing away. Leave it. Sergio nodded once and withdrew. I watched the door close. He seems gentle. Enzo's eyes stayed on the initials. Gentleness is not evidence of innocence. That line stayed with me. Later that afternoon, my own secret surfaced under pressure I could no longer dodge. A bank officer came in person, never a good sign, and asked quietly whether I planned to cover the second missed payment on the pension mortgage. My uncle heard enough to understand the shape if not the numbers. You said August bookings would fix it, he whispered after the man left. I said they might. You're 3 months behind. 4. His face folded in a way age had not managed alone. Clara, I had not wanted Enzo to hear that conversation. Of course he did. He found me in the laundry room afterward, refolding already folded towels with violence disguised as neatness. You should have told someone, he said. I did. The bank, that isn't what I meant. Well, it's what I had. He stood in the doorway, not crowding me, which somehow made it worse. You were carrying this alone. People do that. People fail doing that. I turned too fast. And men like you do. There, the wrong thing said because truth had come too close. He took it and did not flinch. Constantly. We both went quiet, then he did something unexpected. He reached past me, picked up the folded towel I had mangled, shook it open, and laid it flat again on the table. No lecture, no offer of money. Just a domestic correction so simple it nearly broke something in me. My sister used to do this when she was angry, he said. Fold the same thing until it became an accusation. I looked at his hands on the towel. Strong, scarred, careful. Not what I expected from a man others described as a weapon. What was she like? I asked. He stared at the lavender cotton, louder than grief deserved. I did not know what I felt while I was feeling it. Only that I was no longer afraid of him in the way I had been. I was starting to become afraid of myself around him. We left after sunset. Not because I wanted to, but because Enzo looked at the road reports, the cut phone line near the orchard, the mortgage file I had hidden badly, and decided my pension was no longer defensible. He said it in 8 calm words, and a silence I understood better than shouting. "You're coming to the Hill House tonight, Lavanda." I wanted to argue. Instead, I packed one bag like a woman, moving through someone else's life, and watched his men carry my father's ledger to the car. Tommaso appeared in the courtyard just as I came downstairs with my coat. He wore a dark suit, a bulletproof vest he openly resented, and a face arranged for tragedy. Before anyone says anything, Marta has finally agreed to coffee. I blinked. "That's good." "It was," he said bitterly, until she added, "as friends unless the weather becomes unusually persuasive." I now live inside conditional hope. Even I laughed. He pointed accusingly at Enzo. "This is your fault. Women love danger until danger acquires bodyguards." Enzo, who was checking the chamber of a pistol with absent precision, said, "Get in the second car, Tommaso." Tommaso sighed toward the heavens. "She'll think I'm unavailable emotionally, which is unfair. I am unavailable geographically." The road from my pension wound along the cliff, past dark citrus groves and stone shrines with chipped saints facing the sea. Rain started again halfway down, light at first, then harder, turning the windshield into a living sheet of silver. I sat in the back beside Enzo because one of his men had taken the front. His presence beside me altered the air more than the storm did. Not touching, not speaking, controlled enough that every silence felt chosen. Then the first shot hit the rear window. Everything after that happened in pieces. The glass starred but held. The driver cursed. Another shot punched the tire and sent the car fishtailing toward the guard wall. Enzo moved before the impact finished arriving, one arm across my chest, dragging me down as the vehicle slammed sideways into stone. Metal screamed. My shoulder hit leather, then his ribs, then darkness burst with headlights. "Stay down," he said. Men shouted outside. More shots. The smell of hot rubber and gunpowder flooded the car. He shoved my door open, pulled me half across the seat and out into rain so cold it felt like a slap. Then he put himself between me and the road. That was when I saw the full monster under the controlled man. Not cruelty, not rage for show, efficiency stripped of everything but protection. He fired twice without wasted motion. One shadow fell beyond the low wall. Another disappeared behind olive trees. A third came too close, and Enzo met him hand to hand in the rain, violent and fast in a way that looked less like fighting and more like survival refusing to negotiate. I crouched behind the wrecked wheel, breath tearing, rain soaking my hair against my throat. One attacker swung wide, coming around toward me. I grabbed the emergency flare from the footwell because it was there, and because fear makes scavengers of us all. When he lunged, I struck. The lit flare smashed across his face. He screamed, staggered back blinded red, and Enzo turned at the sound. What happened next took less than a second, long enough for me to know I had changed something, not enough to stop it. When silence finally came, it arrived jagged. Rain hissed on the road. One of Enzo's men groaned near the second car. Tommaso, white-faced and somehow still alive, crawled from behind a drainage wall clutching a bouquet that had once been chrysanthemums and was now botany under stress. "I want it noted," he gasped, "that I remained brave throughout an event I thoroughly opposed." Nobody answered him. Enzo turned to me. Blood striped one side of his face, not all of it his. His breathing had gone harsh in the chest, then steadied by force when his eyes found me whole. For one terrible second, he looked almost angry. "Are you hit?" "No." "Show me." "I'm fine." "Clara." It was the first time he used my name like that, sharp with fear he refused to call fear. I held out my hands, shaking, whole. Something inside him gave, just a fraction. His POV, only a paragraph. He had seen women scream at guns, men beg before knives, priests lie with blood in their teeth. He had expected Clara Romano to break the first night. She found steel under his pillow. Instead, she had unloaded his weapon, changed the sheet, and looked at him like he was a man making work for her, not a king of anything. It had followed him ever since, her refusal to worship fear. In a world built on people reacting to his violence, she had answered it with ordinary hands. That was why her. God help him, that was why. He stepped close enough that I could smell rain and smoke and the iron edge of blood. His hand rose to my cheek, stopped, then lowered to my shoulder instead. The first stop. Then his fingers slid briefly, almost against my neck, and stopped again. The second. Finally, he leaned his forehead to mine for one suspended breath and pulled back before it became a kiss. The third. "War's here," he said. I hated that the words frightened me less than the softness that preceded them. Tommaso staggered upright behind us, clutching one surviving flower. "On the positive side," he said weakly, "Marta likes men with stories." It was such a ridiculous line that I laughed once, half hysterical and fully human. Enzo looked at me as if that, too, undid him. And when he said, "Come with me, Lavanda," the nickname had turned gentler than either of us were ready to admit. The hill house sat above the sea outside Castelmola, all stone walls, iron gates, and windows too narrow for comfort. It belonged to one of Enzo's dead uncles or living companies. I never got a straight answer. Inside, it smelled faintly of wax, old paper, and fresh sheets no one had slept in long enough to disturb. I spent 2 days there while war assembled itself politely around us. Phone calls at all hours, men arriving with bruised knuckles and leaving with orders, routes cut, warehouses searched. A customs officer disappeared, then reappeared in a clinic with 3 broken fingers and a better memory. Sergio Delizio came and went with his same grave, fatherly calm, bringing updates, medications for Enzo's side wound. And the kind of gaze older men gave younger women when they thought kindness made them invisible. I disliked him on instinct and felt childish for it. On the 3rd morning, Enzo let me work, not because he enjoyed compromise, because he had learned I would become unbearable if left useless. So I sat in the library with the ledger, the false invoices, and a map of the port routes while he circled the room on calls and Tommaso drifted through twice with coffee. Once with flowers from Marta, that definitely did not mean anything and therefore clearly meant everything. By late afternoon, I found the pattern. The altered shipments clustered not around Barisi's public holdings, but around emergency diversions, routes only a small inner circle could authorize during weather or police pressure. Someone close to Enzo had been reassigning cargo under the excuse of protection. Not a leak, a hand on the steering wheel. I showed him the columns. He read them once, jaw tightening. "Someone inside transportation." "Someone trusted," I said. He did not argue. That evening my uncle called from the pension. His voice shook before he even said hello. "They burned the lower storage shed," he said. "Not the house, just enough." Just enough, as if measured cruelty were less cruel. My stomach went cold. "Are you hurt?" "No, Biagio." A pause too long, then, "They painted your name on the wall." I closed my eyes, message received, not random, not collateral, personal. After the call, I stood in the laundry room because the smell of soap and folded cloth was the only thing that still felt sane. Enzo found me there 10 minutes later. "This is what it costs," I said before he could speak. His face was unreadable. "Yes, not just danger." I looked at the stacked towels, the linens, the household things. Who I am when I wake up. What gets marked with my name, what everyone near me becomes. He came closer, then stopped before the distance became touch. "I can have you on a ferry to Naples by dawn." Real exit point. The room tilted slightly. He went on, voice flat with effort. "New papers, cash, you disappear, this ends for you." I stared at him. "You'd let me go?" "Yes. Would you look for me?" His throat moved once. "No." The lie sat between us so cleanly that I almost smiled. Outside the window, the sea darkened to slate. Somewhere downstairs, Tommaso was explaining to a guard that dried roses preserved feeling, not delusion. Life continued offensively. "If I leave," I said slowly, "my pension still burns. My uncle still lives with my name on a wall. My father still dies under lies. Yes, And if I stay, you become a target. I laughed once without humor. Already done. He did not deny it. This was the real choice, not romance, not capture mistaken for devotion, door open, cost visible. I thought about my mother dying worried and poor, my father vanishing into rumor. The mortgage file in my bag, the shed at the pension, the road attack, the ledger. The way Enzo kept choosing walls over people because somewhere beneath it, he believed being alone was the same thing as being strong. Then I thought about the flare in my hand on the road. About the fact that I had struck back before asking permission. About how terrified I had been and how alive. "I'm staying," I said. Something changed in his face. Not relief, not triumph. Something rougher, respect threaded with dread. "You may hate me for that choice later," he said. "Maybe," I swallowed. "But it'll be my hatred." His hand rose like he meant to touch my cheek and stopped. Another almost, then lowered. "Clara!" It was the wrong thing for him to say in that voice. It reached too deep. I answered with the wrong thing too. "I'm not afraid of you." His eyes darkened. "That's not the danger." There it was. Stage 2, named without naming, not afraid of him, afraid of myself around him. That night I unpacked the bag I would have taken to Naples. The act felt smaller than destiny and heavier than prayer. I was taken in daylight. That still feels rude, even in memory. Enzo had moved the core of his operation from the Hill House to an abandoned vineyard estate inland, closer to the roads feeding Messina and farther from the sea. I went with Tommaso and 2 guards to retrieve account books from the pension because, despite war, banks continued being banks. The village square looked painfully normal. Children kicked a flattened bottle cap near the church steps. A woman argued over tomatoes. Marta stood in her doorway, ignoring Tommaso with the tenderness of long practice. "I think," Tommaso whispered as we crossed the square, "that she resists because my love intimidates her botanically. She resists because you send lilies on weekdays. Romance has no calendar." It was the last ordinary thing I heard. The van that took me had bakery markings on the side. Of course it did. Sicily prefers irony with logistics. Smoke burst first from the corner alley. One guard shouted. The second reached for me and went down under a strike I never saw clearly. A hand clamped over my mouth, another over my waist. I kicked hard enough to feel bone give under my heel, but too many men are still too many men when surprise is on their side. I woke on stone, not cold cellar stone. Chapel stone, old, echoing. The room smelled of dust, candle wax, and damp plaster. There were no candles now, just iron holders fixed to walls where saints had once watched over confessions. The windows were boarded. Rope bit my wrists in front. My head throbbed. I did not break. That surprised me. Fear came, yes, sharp physical narrowing, but breaking did not. I sat against the ruined altar and made myself breathe once for each board on the nearest window. Counting had always been how I crossed panic. My father gave me numbers. My mother gave me stubbornness. Between them, I stayed upright. The door opened after what might have been an hour. Sergio Delizio came in carrying water. The slow mystery resolved in the first second I saw his face. Not because he smiled like a villain. He didn't. Not because he gloated. He didn't. Because betrayal, when it finally removes the mask, often looks exactly like itself, quiet, tired, and already justified. I stared at him. "No, I'm sorry," he said. That was somehow the worst possible opening. "You're the initials." He set down the glass. "Yes," I laughed once, broken at the edges. "You brought sandwiches." He flinched. "Good." "I changed your father's route the day he died," Sergio said after a moment. "Not because I wanted him dead, because I thought Barassi only meant to scare him." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "My father, he found the ledger before it was complete. He saw too much." "And Rosalia," Sergio looked away, weight must be felt. "Barassi wanted leverage over Enzo," he said. "I diverted the car." I didn't know she had taken it. There it was, the specific ruin, Enzo's dead sister, my dead father. One man's careful betrayal feeding both graves. I tasted blood where I had bitten my lip in the struggle. You stayed near him after that. Yes. Why? His mouth tightened. Because once you help build a lie that large, living inside it starts to feel like necessity. That line frightened me because it sounded true in ways evil speeches never did. The chapel door opened again. Vittorio Barassi entered in a tailored navy coat that made him look more like a senator than a monster. Older than Enzo, older than my father would have been. Silver hair, patient eyes, polished shoes unsuited to dust. The kind of man villagers called honorable because his donations came with church plaques. "My dear Clara," he said. "You have your father's timing." I said nothing. He stopped a few feet away, hands behind his back. "Enzo mistakes survival for morality. It's a common defect in men who inherit violence. You raised him," a flicker in his face. "I instructed him." That was all the villain explanation I needed. Not plan, character. "Where's the original ledger?" Barassi asked. I smiled because I had learned some things from dangerous men. "If you knew how to finish your own problems, I wouldn't be here." His palm struck my face hard enough to ring the chapel. Sergio shut his eyes. Better. I turned back slowly, lips split, and said through blood, "My father wasn't scared of you either." The lie passed over Barassi's face like weather over stone. "Your father was terrified." Maybe he had been. Maybe courage was simply what fear looked like when it did not get to make decisions. Later, when Barassi left and Sergio stayed by the door like an aging ghost, I asked the question that had been waiting since childhood. "Did he beg?" Sergio did not answer. He did not need to. I looked at the ruined saints on the wall and felt grief arrive as something too large for tears. Then, from somewhere outside the chapel, came 3 gunshots in quick succession. Sergio stiffened, more shots, nearer. He whispered almost to himself, "He found us." I closed my eyes once. Edge of too late had a sound. It sounded like splintering wood and men shouting Enzo Carbone's name like a warning. The first thing I heard after the boards broke was my own name. Not shouted. Cut loose. "Clara!" Enzo's voice came through the chapel like a blade slid from its sheath. Men flooded the doorway behind him, guns up, boots scattering splinters and old dust. Sergio moved for the weapon at his back and stopped when Enzo aimed dead center at his chest. For one breath, everyone held still. Then Sergio did the only useful thing left in him. He dropped the gun and stepped away from me. Enzo crossed the ruined aisle in 4 strides. He knelt in front of me, knife already at the ropes, but his free hand went first to my face, my split lip, my throat, the place where fear might still be hiding. Checking, counting, needing proof. "I'm here," I said. His jaw tightened as if the words cost him. The rope fell away. My hands came loose. Before I could think better of it, I caught his coat and held on. Not gracefully, not proudly. Like a woman who had found ground after falling through something deep. His forehead touched mine once. Quick, desperate, wordless. Then it was over and he was Enzo again, standing, turning, issuing orders like survival had its own liturgy. "Take Sergio alive," he said. Sergio's face went gray. Death would have been cleaner. Enzo had no interest in clean. We moved out through the back of the chapel because Barassi had already fled. Of course he had. Men like that rarely mistook their own courage for virtue. The vineyard estate spread below the ridge in low stone walls and dead winter vines. Smoke drifted from the storage barn where the first team had breached. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, decorative as always. Enzo's side had reopened slightly during the assault. I could by the time we returned to the vineyard estate, the adrenaline had burned off and left only pain behind. Not the dramatic kind. Nothing noble, just the blunt, humiliating ache of being alive after terror. My wrists were raw where the rope had bitten. My lip had swollen. My knees shook so badly on the stairs that I hated every witness to it. Enzo's side had bled through his shirt again, dark and ugly beneath the black cloth, but he still moved through the house like a man holding everyone else up by refusing to bend. I understood then why people mistook that for strength. It looked like certainty from a distance. Up close, it looked like damage with good posture. Tommaso met us in the lower hall, one sleeve torn, hair wild, eyes brighter than fear should have allowed. "Before anyone says anything," he announced, "Marta slapped me for getting shot at and then cried into my collar, which I consider a meaningful civic development." I laughed despite the blood on my mouth. Enzo's gaze flicked to me at the sound. Just once. Fast, as if he had needed proof I was still capable of it. Tommaso saw the look and, for once in his over-decorated life, lowered his voice. "I'll send tea. Send a doctor," I said. "He's already here, he's terrified." "It's excellent." Then he squeezed my shoulder with surprising gentleness and vanished into the kitchen, still muttering about emotionally significant slaps. Enzo took me upstairs himself. Not by carrying me. He knew better than that. By staying one step behind me on the staircase as though ready to catch what I denied was falling. Inside the room, the lamp was already lit. Fresh sheets had been put on the bed. Even here, in a house built for siege, someone had used lavender starch. The scent rose between us at once. His eyes closed for a fraction of a second. "That was all. Sit," he said. "You first." His mouth almost moved. "Still giving orders? You're bleeding on expensive furniture." He let me win because he was tired enough not to spend the argument. He sat in the wooden chair by the window and shrugged out of his jacket with a slow, controlled motion that made me wince on his behalf. When he reached for the buttons of his shirt, I stepped forward. "I can do it." His hand stilled. The room went strangely quiet. This was not our first closeness. But it was the first without interruption, without road noise, without gunfire, without other men dragging the world through the doorway. Just me, him, the rain striking the shutters, and the scent of clean linen in a guarded house. "Clara," he said. It was warning, gratitude, refusal trying to dress itself as caution. "I know your name," I said softly. "Hold still." He let me. I undid the shirt carefully, easing fabric from the bandage at his ribs. The wound had reopened along one edge, not catastrophic, angry. His skin was hot beneath my fingers. Scar crossed scar across his torso, old violence layered over newer ones, a map of everything life had taken payment for. "You should be in a hospital," I said. "I'd be killed in one." "That isn't reassuring." "It wasn't meant to be." I peeled back the bloodied dressing, cleaned the wound, and rewrapped it while he sat absolutely still. Not because it did not hurt, because showing hurt had become foreign to him years ago. I recognized effort when I saw it. "You can exhale," I murmured. "I am." "No." "You're performing respiration out of spite." That did it. The smallest breath of laughter escaped him, rough and brief and almost disbelieving, like he had forgotten the sound belonged in his own throat. I tied off the bandage and stepped back. He caught my wrist, not hard, not trapping, just enough to stop distance. I looked at his hand around me, then at his face. He released me immediately, but the moment stayed. Downstairs, voices moved through the halls. Doors opened and shut. Men carried out war in low tones. Yet inside that room, everything had narrowed to one terrible, fragile stillness. "You should have gone to Naples," he said. "You already offered." "I'm offering again." "No," his jaw tightened. "This ends badly for people near me." "That isn't an argument." "It's a pattern. It's also fact." I folded the used cloths too neatly to keep from shaking. "You think if you warn me often enough, what happens next becomes my fault." His gaze sharpened. "That isn't what I'm doing. It is exactly what you're doing." I turned to face him fully. "You wrap loneliness in nobility and call it protection. You push everyone far enough away that when blood comes, you can tell yourself no one paid for loving you." He stood, too fast for his wound, but he did it anyway. The air changed between us. I had hit something true. I knew it by the way he went still rather than angry. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said quietly. "Then tell me." He did not. Of course he did not. Men like Enzo Carbone were built around locked rooms. Wealth, violence, power, those were only gates. The real fortress was the one that kept grief from being witnessed. I reached into my pocket and drew out the tarnished saint medal from the wall hollow. His eyes dropped to it at once. "I kept this," I said. I don't know why. Give it to me. No. His gaze lifted slowly back to mine. I turned the metal in my hand. It was heavier than it should have been, old, hinged. The kind of devotional trinket peasants and smugglers and frightened mothers all trusted for different reasons. My thumbnail found the seam. The front clicked open. Inside, folded into a space no thicker than a fingernail, was a scrap of paper. We both went still. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was my father's. For one moment the room ceased to be the Hill House, the war, the night, the wounded man before me. It was only my father's hand reaching across 7 years to touch mine. I read aloud because I could not bear to read it alone. If this is found, then I failed to leave cleanly. Rosalia took the car because she came to warn her brother. Sergio changed the route. Barassi gave the order. I kept records because dead men are often called liars. The true pages are in the Lion at San Aurelio. If Clara finds this, trust numbers, not men who sound kind. And if Enzo Carbone is standing there alone, tell him that being left alive is not the same as being meant to stand by himself. My voice broke on the last line. The silence after it felt holy and terrible. Enzo took the paper from my hand like it might burn through skin. He read it once, then again. His face changed so little that anyone else might have missed it. I did not. He looked like a man who had just been seen by a ghost and hated the relief of it. The Lion at San Aurelio, I whispered. What is that? Villa Barassi, he said. His voice had gone flat in the dangerous way. The courtyard fountain. There's a stone lion at the base. The true pages, yes, and now, he folded the note once, exact as a blade. Now Barassi dies. No, the word came out sharp enough to cut. His eyes lifted. You said yourself, I went on, that possibility is not proof. Now you have proof, use it. Proof is for courts. Then use it for men who still need convincing. He took one step toward me. You think there is a version of this where he goes quietly? No, I said. I think there's a version where you stop acting like revenge is the same thing as justice. That landed. He looked at me for a long second that seemed to scrape all pretense clean off both of us. Then he said, almost gently, You're asking a great deal from a man like me. I swallowed. I know. His hand came up. This time it did not stop. His fingers touched my cheek, the uninjured side first, then brushed carefully near the split at my lip, as if even pain there belonged to him now by responsibility if not by right. My breath caught. He looked at my mouth, then at my eyes, then back again with the concentration of a man crossing dangerous ground. Clara, he said, and my name inside his voice was ruin. I kissed him first. Not because I was brave, because if I had waited for him to believe he was allowed, we might both have died old and furious. His restraint lasted less than a heartbeat. Then his hand slid to the back of my neck, and he kissed me like a man who had been starving in public for years without once calling hunger by its proper name. There was nothing polished in it. Nothing easy. It was rain and grief and withheld tenderness finally breaking structure. The kind of kiss that says, I should not and I have been doing it anyway in every room since I met you. When we parted, neither of us moved far. His forehead rested against mine. I will still kill him if he reaches for you, he said. Reasonable. That was not permission. It was close enough. A sound from the doorway made us turn. Tommaso stood there holding a tray with tea, sandwiches, and the expression of a man witnessing literature. He sighed wistfully. Marta always says timing matters. Get out, Enzo said. Tommaso nodded. Deeply fair, but before I go, the doctor requests the patient stop kissing through reopened stitches. Then he set the tray down and fled before either of us could throw something. I laughed helplessly into my hand. Enzo watched me, and something in his face softened so unexpectedly that I had to look away first. Below us, the house kept moving toward war. Above it, in a room smelling of lavender starch and blood and rain, I understood at last that the most dangerous thing about Enzo Carbone was not that he could kill. It was that part of him had wanted, all this time, to stay. We went to Villa Barassi at dusk, not in secret, not entirely. Some things deserved witnesses. The plan, as Enzo laid it out over the long dining table at dawn, offended nearly every instinct his men possessed. There would be no quiet execution in a field, no body sunk into harbor concrete, no neat disappearance attributed to old enemies and bad luck. Instead, he intended to use the true pages from my father's records, Sergio Delizio's testimony, and Vittorio Baresi's own certainty in his ability to control the room. Men like him, Enzo said, one hand braced against the table's edge, only become careless when they think they are still the most civilized people present. Sergio sat at the far end with 2 guards behind him and looked 10 years older than he had in the chapel. He had spoken before dawn, not nobly, not cleanly, but completely. My father had discovered the false accounts and the shipment diversions. When he threatened to take copies and leave Sicily with me and my mother, Baresi ordered him intercepted. Sergio changed his route thinking. At first, it would frighten Matteo into obedience. Then Rosalia took Enzo's car to carry a warning, and the bomb meant to force silence took her instead. My father lived long enough to understand what had happened. He hid the ledger and the medal at Villa Romano, then tried to flee. Baresi's men caught him near the old marina. Did he suffer? I asked once, because by then truth had already done the worst it could. Sergio had closed his eyes. Less than I deserved. I had not forgiven him, but I had believed him. By noon, men loyal to Enzo had already gone to San Aurelio and opened the lion at the Baresi fountain. Inside the stone base, wrapped in waxed cloth, were the missing pages, port authorizations, judges' payoffs, customs diversions, signatures, names layered over years, not just proof of betrayal. Proof of architecture. By afternoon, 2 magistrates from Messina had been anonymously tipped. A customs officer with ambitions larger than his fear had been handed copies. One journalist in Palermo had received photographs timed to publish if certain people failed to answer their phones by midnight. Enzo did not trust the law. He trusted pressure. That perhaps was wiser. You stay in the second courtyard, he told me for the 3rd time before we left. No, his eyes narrowed. Clara, this concerns my father, it concerns Rosalia. It concerns the house Baresi, burned with my name on the wall. I fastened the dark wool coat at my throat. I'm done being moved like furniture. Tommaso, adjusting a tie he clearly believed made him look bulletproof, muttered, She makes a persuasive point. Enzo turned his head slightly. Tommaso, I support you spiritually, Tommaso said at once. And her practically. Marta, who had appeared 20 minutes earlier with a first aid bag and the cool stare of a woman who had survived too much nonsense to be impressed by men under arms, folded her own scarf and said, If you argue any longer, Signor Carbone, Baresi will die of old age before you reach him. Tommaso looked at her like a pilgrim at a miracle. We went. Villa Baresi sat above the road behind iron gates and cypress lines, pale stone glowing gold under the last light. Wealth always looked calmer from far away. Closer, you saw what it cost to maintain. The gates opened before we knocked. Of course they did. Baresi had invited us into his dignity because he still believed he owned the room. The courtyard fountain stood where I remembered it from the photograph. A weathered basin, a rearing stone lion at the center, water dark in the evening shadows. The space smelled of rosemary, wet stone, and old money. Men lined the arcade. Some I recognized from port dinners, charity galas, funerals where everyone lied politely over expensive shoes. Vittorio Baresi waited under the loggia in a charcoal suit, silver hair immaculate, expression almost avuncular. Enzo, he said, you've brought a procession. Only the honest ones, Enzo answered. Baresi's gaze shifted to me. Clara Romano, your mother had better judgment. She also had cancer, I said. People manage what they can. Tommaso made a tiny choked noise behind me that might have been admiration. Baresi's mouth thinned. Good. Sergio was brought forward then, flanked by 2 of Enzo's men. For the first time that night, something real cracked Baresi's composure. It lasted less than a second. Still, I saw it. You disappoint me, Barassi said to him. Sergio laughed once without humor. That would imply I still cared. Enzo placed the pages on the stone edge of the fountain, weighed flat under one hand. Your signatures, your roots, your judges, your diverted inspections. My sister's death, Matteo Romano's murder, enough to bury what's left of your name. Barassi glanced at the pages and then back up, bored on purpose. You mistake paper for power. No, I said quietly, you mistake power for permanence. Every head in the courtyard turned slightly. He looked at me with the patient disdain of older men who thought women existed only as scenery until they interrupted legacy. And you think you understand this world? I understand accounts, I said, and patterns. Men like you believe ruin only counts if it happens in ledgers, courts, newspapers, but villages count too. Burned sheds count, daughters count, sisters count. The evening wind moved through the cypresses. Far beyond the gates, I heard the faint grind of tires on gravel, witnesses arriving. Barassi heard it too. His gaze shifted toward the drive, then back to Enzo. So this is theater. Enzo's expression did not move. No. Theater would involve mercy for your audience. The first car entered the drive, then, official enough to offend everyone present. Another behind it, not an army, not salvation. Just enough state presence to complicate open bloodshed. That was when Barassi finally stopped pretending. He smiled. It was the ugliest thing I had seen all night because it contained relief. You still need their uniforms, he said to Enzo softly. After everything. No, Enzo said. I need them to witness what happens when your friends stop answering. At his signal, one of his men handed copies of the pages to the arriving officials. Another handed a packet to the customs officer. A third passed photographs to the journalist climbing from the second car, already dialing numbers into a phone with the hunger of a man who smelled front pages. The courtyard shifted. Loyalties do not break all at once. They loosen at the edges where consequences appear. Two of Barassi's men stepped back without meaning to. One looked toward the gate. Another toward the fountain pages, then away. Sergio kept his eyes lowered as if he no longer deserved light, and Barassi, still proud, still composed, reached inside his coat. I saw it before anyone shouted. Not the gun, the intention. There is a moment before violence breaks fully open when the world goes sharp instead of fast. I knew the angle of his shoulder. I knew where Enzo stood. I knew how close the nearest official was and how useless surprise makes law. Enzo, Barassi drew. The gunfire came in one brutal line. Enzo moved at the same instant I did. So did Sergio. Sergio stepped between them. The first bullet meant for Enzo took Sergio high in the chest and drove him backward into the fountain base. The second shattered stone at the lion's mouth. The third never fired because Enzo's shot caught Barassi's center mass and hurled him against a pillar hard enough to crack the air from the courtyard. Then silence. Not true silence. People shouting. Shoes scraping. Water spilling from the broken lion. Someone screaming for a doctor. But compared to the shot, compared to the years before it, it was silence. Barassi slid down the pillar and sat there stunned, bleeding dark through expensive wool, one hand clamped uselessly to his chest. Still alive. Of course he was. Men like him always required effort. Enzo crossed the courtyard slowly, gun steady at his side. No one stopped him. Not the officials, not the guards, not me. Barassi looked up at him with pain stripping the polish from his face. You were always wasted on sentiment. Enzo crouched in front of him. When he spoke, his voice carried no drama at all. That was somehow worse. You killed Rosalia because she loved me enough to run toward danger. You killed Matteo Romano because he counted better than your lies. You let other men bury your fear and called it order. His gaze did not waver. You taught me power was being the last man standing. Barassi coughed blood and smiled with what he had left. Isn't it? Enzo looked at him for a long moment. Then he lowered the gun. No, he said. That word moved through me like thunder. Behind us, officials surged forward at last. Hands grabbed Barassi. Orders snapped. Evidence changed ownership. Men began deciding in real time who they had always secretly opposed. Sergio made a sound near the fountain. I turned first. He was on the stones where he had fallen, blood spreading into the water broken from the lion's mouth. I knelt beside him because spite, grief, and pity are not opposites no matter what stories claim. His breathing had gone shallow and wet. "You don't get absolution from me," I said. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "I know." Enzo came to stand beside us. Sergio looked up at him with the terrible clarity dying sometimes grants cowards too late. "Your mother," he whispered, voice catching. "Matteo tried to get Rosalia out." "He nearly did." He swallowed blood. "He didn't leave your fatherless world untouched, Clara. He fought." My eyes burned. Sergio shifted his gaze back to Enzo. "I stayed because I was ashamed," a ragged breath, "and because leaving would have required becoming someone else." Enzo said nothing. Sergio nodded weakly, as if silence were the sentence he had expected all along. "Fair." He died there at the base of the broken lion while water ran red into the courtyard, and the name Barassi began, at last, to lose its shape as a house no one could enter. Later, when the officials had taken Barassi away alive enough to suffer the public part of ruin, Enzo found me under the arcade with my coat open to the cold air. "It's over," he said. "No," I answered honestly. "It's finished, that's different." His gaze searched my face. "Are you all right?" "No," a pause. "Neither am I." That was the first truest thing he had given me without being forced. I stepped toward him. "Good." One dark brow lifted. "Good." "Yes." "It means you're still a person." The corner of his mouth moved despite everything. Under the archway, at the far end of the courtyard, Tommaso stood beside Marta with one hand wrapped in hers, and whispered something that made her roll her eyes before rising onto her toes to kiss his cheek. He looked so stunned by the event that I almost laughed. Enzo followed my gaze. Miracles happen, rarely to deserving people. Then Tommaso had odds. I turned back to him. The night wind carried cypress and wet stone and the metallic end of old violence. "What now?" I asked. He looked at me the way men look at coastlines they have not yet admitted are home. "That," he said quietly, "depends on whether you still want a man who thought standing alone was the same thing as surviving." I took his hand. Only that. In a courtyard where power had spent decades performing itself badly, the gesture felt larger than gunfire. "I want the man," I said. "The rest can learn." The first peaceful morning felt suspicious. I woke in a room at Villa Romano with sunlight on the curtains and spent a full 10 seconds waiting for shouting, engines, or gunfire before I remembered that quiet was once the natural shape of a day. It was nearly offensive how soft the sea sounded without fear inside it. My pension smelled of plaster dust, lemon polish, and fresh paint where the lower storage shed had been rebuilt. The wall with my name burned into it had been scrubbed, sanded, and repainted twice by men who did not meet my eyes while doing it. The orchard gate had been repaired. The courtyard lamp rewired. Half the village had arrived over the course of 2 weeks, pretending they came to help Biagio with masonry, when in truth they came to see whether I looked different now that I had survived Notorious. Men and become gossip with a pulse. I did look different. I stood straighter when saying no. Enzo had not tried to buy the pension. That was how I knew he loved me. He had tried, on the 3rd day after Barassi's arrest and the first public wave of warrants, to pay off my mortgage through a lawyer, a bank manager, and 2 shell companies, so indirect they almost impressed me. I returned every document unsigned with a note that read, "If you attempt to rescue my bookkeeping again, I'll charge you emotional damages." He sent back one line in his own hand. Then let me become revenue. We negotiated like civilized enemies. By the end of it, we arrived at terms. His legitimate shipping company would house auditors, surveyors, and port consultants at Villa Romano for 6 months, while the routes reorganized under new supervision. Full rate, paid in advance, no favors disguised as generosity. I added a surcharge for bullet repair to room 7. He paid it without argument. That was love too, apparently. By late October, I had bookings through winter. My uncle cried once over the ledger books and then denied it with such dignity that I loved him for the lie. Tommaso became intolerable in happiness. Marta had agreed, after surviving kidnapping fallout, roadside gunfire, and 3 funerals of men she had disliked on principle, to dine with him every Sunday as long as he stopped weaponizing lilies. He failed at restraint almost immediately, but now he did it with permission. Some afternoons, I found him arranging flowers on my breakfast tables under Marta's supervision, while she insulted his ribbon choices with enough fondness to alarm everyone. I always said, he told me one morning while trimming stems badly, that near-death experience improves romantic clarity. Marta snatched the shears from his hand. No. It merely shut you up long enough for me to miss the noise. He looked at her like a man hearing church bells pronounce his name. I left them to their catastrophe. As for Enzo, the newspapers developed an appetite for public men falling from private heights. Barisi's accounts fed magistrates for weeks. 2 judges retired suddenly. 3 customs officers remembered religion. 1 parliamentarian denied knowing anything so loudly that everyone became certain he did. Enzo moved through the aftermath with his usual calm, but something fundamental had shifted. He no longer disappeared without leaving word. He no longer slept with a gun under his pillow. This was not because the world had softened. It had not. Men were still arrested. Others still needed replacing. Old alliances still had to be cut clean and rebuilt without rot. Power remained ugly work even when done carefully, but he had stopped treating solitude as proof of capability. That change came slowly enough to be real. Sometimes he worked from the old study at Villa Romano, while I handled accounts in the next room. Sometimes he took calls in the orchard with one hand in his pocket and the other resting on the stone wall my father had repaired, as if learning the house by touch. Once I found him in the laundry room staring at neatly folded sheets with an expression I recognized only after a moment. Peace made him uneasy. I came to stand beside him. No one's hidden ammunition in the towels. Yet, I leaned against the table. You know, most men in love bring jewelry. He looked at me sidelong. I brought 6 months of guaranteed occupancy. That is, offensively seductive. The corner of his mouth turned. I watched his hands on the folded linen, scarred, steady, no weapon in them, and understood that tenderness for someone like him would always arrive dressed as logistics first. "Enzo," I said. He looked at me. "Did you ever sleep before?" The question hung between us. He answered because we had earned that much. "Not well. And now?" His gaze dropped briefly to the lavender stack of sheets, then back to my face. "Better when I know where you are." Something warm and painful moved through my chest. "That's inconvenient," I said softly. "For me, for the independent business owner who intended to remain impossible." He stepped closer. "How's that going?" I pretended to consider it. "Poorly." He touched the edge of my jaw, not like a man claiming, like a man still slightly astonished touch was available to him without blood around it. "Good," he said. We might have kissed there if Tommaso had not burst through the door carrying an avalanche of white stock flowers and proclaiming, "Before anyone panics, this is not a proposal bouquet. It is a rehearsal bouquet. Marta says practice improves sincerity, and I have decided to become an artisan of devotion." Enzo closed his eyes briefly. I laughed. "For who?" Tommaso looked scandalized. "For Marta, naturally. She says if I ever propose without consulting floral architecture first, she'll leave me at the altar before I invent one." From somewhere behind him, Marta's voice carried in. "Because you would make it Baroque out of insecurity." Tommaso turned toward the hall and shouted, "It would be lush." "Not insecure." Then he noticed Enzo's hand still at my face and brightened with unbearable intuition. "Ah, I see I have interrupted a silence with quality potential. Continue, I'm evolving elsewhere." He disappeared again. Even Enzo laughed that time. not the short exhale I had learned to steal from him. An actual laugh, low and disbelieving, like the sound had surprised him on the way out. I stared so openly that he went suspicious at once. "What? You laugh?" Apparently, I thought perhaps it was mythological. His thumb brushed my lower lip where the split had long since healed. "Careful, Lavanda." There it was. The nickname softened all the way down now, no longer possession, no longer teasing. Something closer to prayer said by a man who trusted very few altars. That evening, I changed the sheets in room 7 myself. I did it because old habits survive revolutions, and because some parts of a life need reclaiming by hand. The windows were open to the sea. The sunset had gone copper over the cliffs. Fresh linen snapped cool between my fingers, full of lavender starch and late light. When I lifted the pillow, my breath caught out of instinct. Nothing. I laughed quietly to myself. The gun was in the bedside drawer instead, unloaded, progress. When I turned, Enzo was leaning against the doorframe watching me. "You moved it," I said. I was given very specific housekeeping feedback. I crossed the room and stopped in front of him. And did the feared man of the eastern coast obey? Reluctantly. Liar. Completely. I slid my hands up the front of his shirt and felt his heartbeat under the cloth, still controlled. Still strong, but no longer distant in the same fatal way. "Do you know," I said, "that the first time I saw you, I thought you looked like a man who hadn't slept in years. I hadn't. And now," he bent and pressed his forehead to mine. The old almost transformed at last into habit. "Now," he said, "I sleep in a house where doors stay open." That nearly undid me. I kissed him before sentiment became too visible to survive. Later, long after the lamps were lowered, and the sea had gone dark beyond the cliff, I lay with my head on his chest and listened to the steadier rhythm of a man no longer mistaking loneliness for strength. The room smelled of salt air, clean cotton, and lavender starch warming slowly beneath our skin. He did not reach under the pillow once. And when sleep finally took him beside me, unguarded enough to trust it, I understood that love had not made Enzo Carbone softer. It had made him brave in a new direction. As for me, I kept the pension, the accounts, the cliffside rooms, the absurd guests, the leaking pipes, the repaired gate, the sea, the grief, the man. And the future, with all its impolite uncertainty. If you ask whether that is a happy ending, I will tell you the truth. In Sicily, happiness is rarely clean. But some mornings, when the sheets are fresh and the windows are open, and the man I love is sleeping peacefully in a bed that no longer has a weapon hidden in it, the whole house smells of lavender. And that is close enough to heaven for me.